The Legal Cheek podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity training contract. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Legal Cheek podcast. I'm Alex Aldridge, publisher of Legal Cheek, and with me is my colleague Julia Sanislow. How are you doing, Julia?
Yeah, not bad. How are you?
Good, good. It's been an interesting week with this Prince Harry case, um, and that is the thing that we're talking about this week. Um, and our angle is basically why Prince Harry's lawfare was a big mistake. Well, that's the case that's what I'm going to argue, and we're going to hopefully bring in some insights into the legal world that haven't been covered in the mainstream media about what happens when you get involved in litigation, um, which um, um, which have played a big role in Prince Harry's various legal cases um, over the years, and he's obviously come out pretty badly from the decision that was made um, over the last few days. Now, Julia, you're going to start off by giving the listeners and viewers a summary of Prince Harry's sort of lawfare in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Alex mentioned, it's been a bit of a protracted battle with the British press for Harry, and this covers all sorts of things. So, whether that was the libel claims that he made against, the Mail on Sunday from this sort of like police protection coverage, or the Royal Marines Captain General story from 2020, I think. But the ones that we're focusing on today are going to broadly focus on this like alleged illegal information gathering claim. So back in 2023, he had made a claim sort of relating to the phone hacking scandal against the Mirror Group, which he succeeded in. So the judge actually found that 15 of the 33 sort of articles, sample articles that had been put forward concerning him were the product of phone hacking or other unlawful information gathering, and he was awarded 140,000 in damages. In January of last year, he settled against the News Group, who are the publisher of The Sun and obviously formerly the News of the World. But they settled right at the last minute before the trial was supposed to start, which he considered to be a victory, and said as much after the news group newspapers issued a quote full and unequivocal apology quote for serious intrusion into his private life. So he's won one case, settled one case, and now we come to the most recent one. So this has been the big news story that he lost against Associated Newspapers, who are the publishers of the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, after a 4 year long protracted process. So they first filed in the High Court in 2022. And this wasn't just Prince Harry, this was Prince Harry and some other claimants. There were 7 of them in total, including high profile figures like Elton John. And it was quite a dramatic press release. Feel free to go and read it. And it has been called as such by lots of different newspapers. But you can expect that. And what they did was that they accused the publisher of, quote, clear, systematic, and sustained use of unlawful information gathering over several years. And they named lots of journalists and private investigators. They accused them of things such as placing bugs in people's cars, listening to phone calls. And yeah, so the trial occurred over 11 weeks, concluding just the other day on the 7th at the Royal Courts of Justice. And unfortunately for Prince Harry, the judgment handed down by Mr Justice Matthew Nicklin dismissed every single one of the 97 allegations that were made. And it boiled down to the fact that they failed to definitively prove any unlawful conduct. And one of the key witnesses was found to have disavowed his own evidence. That was basically the entire case for them was resting on this guy. And yeah, it wasn't true what he said. I think he was like a private investigator. Um, yeah, so and the legal costs are really, really high. They're estimated to sit at around 50 million. They're going to have a hearing in a few weeks to decide who pays. But Prince Harry was obviously not very pleased. He's called the ruling a whitewash. He's also pointed out that the Mr. Justice Nicklin, had earlier in his career actually represented lots of the news groups in the phone hacking litigation. Another key point to mention is that all of the claimants were represented by a very famous barrister in court, David Sherborne. Not Casey. I looked that up. I would have thought he was a Casey. He wasn't. And Prince Harry was represented by Hamlin's LLP, and his solicitor was Callum Galbraith. But I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more about David Sherborne in particular, because he's quite a famous figure, not just in the legal circles, but I think in the British press and beyond. But yeah, this is the last of the newspaper cases that Harry has brought, and that sort of tied it all up. But yeah, it's been the better part of half a decade, I think, for him, and it's, as we'll get into, I'm assuming, not been particularly fun and been, as we can see, quite expensive.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for that summary, Julia. It's really useful because there's been so much been going on. I mean, for a sort of casual observer, he's been kind of involved in this sort of litigation, sort of broadly. It seems to start around kind of 2019 when he started to decide to launch all these cases. And I suppose what strikes me is the huge opportunity cost when you get involved in litigation, because it really does take over your life. And speaking of someone, since I've run Legal Cheek, I've had exposure to this, both kind of from a journalistic perspective, covering the legal profession, but also a number of years ago, I was involved in a case as a defendant, and it was very, very, very tough, and it really does take over your life. Um, you know, you know, in my instance, sort of 18 months. Fortunately, got out of it settled, fine. But it's one of these things where I think people kind of go into the idea. I mean, if you're someone like Prince Harry and you've got some money and you think, right, I'm going to right these wrongs, I'm going to use the legal profession, the legal system to right them. Um, it's not as simple as people think. It's getting involved in litigation is very, very complicated. And whether you're the claimant or you're the defendant, it sort of doesn't matter. You get sucked into this world, and essentially what you're doing is rehashing the past. Is what you're really doing. And so that's why I talked about this idea of opportunity cost. And you're rehashing the past in a way that is incredibly time consuming. And as we've seen in the Prince Harry case, you're having to go through these old emails and the process of disclosure from often many years ago. And some of this stuff, as you rake through it, you just think, I mean, it's kind of boring, but then it's also, you know, I'm sure in Harry's case, it's kind of got an emotional aspect to it, and it just takes over. It just takes over, and you can't focus on the things that you want to focus on, and there's so many, you know, y- in my case, this is quite a number of years ago, but it's like kind of growing a business, and I was stuck with this case, and it was really frustrating. I think in Harry's case, he's trying to got all this stuff going on in California with Netflix deals and stuff, and you'd actually be much. We'll come to this in a second, but anyway, there's a sense of so many other things that you could be doing. But as I said, you're raking through these old emails, or you're going through all this stuff, and it really gets you wound up because you kind of everything's about trying to kind of win this case, and it's kind of addictive. Um, but in a quite a kind of kind of negative way. It's also extremely expensive. You mentioned 50 million. Most of that money goes to lawyers. Like the awards in like civil claims, in the English courts, they're often not really that high. It's kind of an ego thing about you win or you lose. I mean, maybe that's a bit unfair to say ego, because people want to be proven right, and and things. But in terms of the money is going on lawyers, and lawyers are expensive. And this kind of comes through to this idea of like, as a lawyer, you bill by the hour, and you say like, oh, yeah, can't they do it as like a fixed fee and it'll be cheap and they're estimated? Because when you've just got the meter running every hour and their hourly rates, like you mentioned, David Sherborne, the high profile media law barrister who's been acting for Harry, as a top lawyer, he's going to charge a top rate. And it really does add up when it's by the hour. And they can't really do it as a fixed fee in litigation because it's unpredictable. There's so many twists and turns, and you don't know what's going to happen. But you've got these lawyers that are just constantly on the clock, and so every time you have a call with them, email, the clock is running, and it's like so, and it's just so expensive. And all right, 50 million, you think Prince Harry, the royals are worth loads of money, but now a kind of private citizen, isn't he? And that's going to hit him. I imagine that's going to hit him very hard. And when you lose, you tend to pay most of the costs, and the judges they don't like it. I mean, obviously that's still to come, but yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Even when you win, it's not like free. You end up you don't get 100% of your cost back. I think best case scenario you're going to get about 80% or so. But when you lose, it can be very expensive. But obviously you're paying this out the whole time. But then in this case, it'd be having to as the loser potentially having to pay the other side's costs, um, um, and essentially refund them. So you can imagine it's like the idea of this sort of negative thing, so you raking over the past, having to dredge all these old things up, paying to do it the whole time, really expensive. Um, the other element to it is it's well, I think certainly Prince Harry's case and any involving the media is kind of sharky, right? And as we've seen, there was the in that Julia you mentioned there was it a key witness that Harry had that it kind of didn't work out. He was certainly Justice Nicklin wasn't convinced by this individual,
No, yeah.
and um, a lot of people have agendas. The lawyers in a case like this they also have agendas. I mean, I can't speak specifically on this case, but if you just think about the broad principles, okay. So you have Julia, you're joining a city law, big global corporate law firm. Your clients are other businesses. In this case, the lawyers, their clients, they are on one hand the newspapers, on the other in Prince Harry's case, like a very wealthy individual. You'd call that kind of private client work. So lawyers in this space, in sort of civil litigation, often is funded by wealthy individuals. And it's obviously it's in lawyers' interests for those wealthy individuals to litigate if you're a litigator. That's where the work comes from. It doesn't mean that those lawyers they don't believe in a higher thing. They don't, it doesn't mean that they're not believing in what they do. You can kind of believe in what you do and getting justice for your clients, and also know that this is your living and you need this to generate money. Like those things can go together. Um, but the lawyers have got a commercial incentive to litigators have a commercial incentive to engage in litigation. Um, they're part of a world of other litigators. They have lots of, it's kind of like the media law world is quite a small world. And, um, and, um, and it, indeed, I suppose we see that in the fact Justice Nicklin himself is a former media law barrister. I think he was at 5RB, which is
Yeah.
the same chambers of David Sherborne, Harry's barrister is.
Yeah, they were
And
there at the same time, actually.
yeah, and that's mega common.
Yeah.
5RB is like the top set for media law, and that's mega common. You get so there's going to be, and people forget all judges are. it's former lawyers who've gone up and become judges. And so it's kind of a it's kind of a small world. I mean, did you said and I think we're kind of getting into a sort of another area, I suppose, here. But essentially what you're doing when you're getting into this world is you're allowing a kind of small, well, Harry is kind of allowing kind of a small group of people, essentially the media law community, to make a decision on whether, well, to fight it out between themselves on whether um, he's going to win his case or he's going to lose his case. And the deciding person ultimately is a former media lawyer, now a judge. And that's the what it is. That's the rule of law. That's the judicial system. Like these judges, they're very impressive. Like I'm not saying like Nicklin, top media law barrister, really experienced. Not just, you say, I suppose I'm being a bit cynical. I say just a former lawyer, but he's also kind of like a wise man, or a wise person, just deciding the dispute. But ultimately, you're letting a small community of lawyers, or now judges, but still lawyers, just argue between themselves to decide something. And you're going to be really happy if they decide in your favor, or really sad if they don't. That's the deal. So to kind of at the end of that to say it's a whitewash, well, it's a whitewash. Don't do it in the first. It's, don't do it in the first place if that's the way you want to. So to me, what that speaks to, I don't think it is a whitewash, but it speaks to Harry having this kind of, he's not gone in with his eyes open to what he's doing. Do you know what I mean? Like if he's going to come away and just it perhaps he had an idea of what this process was, which was a kind of higher, mightier process than it actually is. What I'd actually argue it's a really stressful, at times kind of grubby process, which you're gonna maybe not get an entirely satisfying result, whether you win or you lose. And I think, did you mention also, Julia, I hadn't heard that been a mention that kind of Nicklin had acted for other kind of during the sort of phone hacking
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah,
Did you
he
say
had.
he'd acted for?
He'd acted for, gosh, I can't remember now. NGN, so the news group newspapers, and also MGN as well in the, I guess, the phone hacking litigation. And it's also worth bearing in mind that David Sherborne acted quite a bit throughout the phone hacking litigation as well, but for some of the sort of high profile individuals who were, no, not the phone hacking litigation, the phone hacking sort of inquiry, the Leveson inquiry, he acted for,
But I mean,
like, Rowling and whatnot. So it is a really small world.
it's a small world. But
Yeah.
and you say that Harry had flagged that, or his team, or
No, no, that's just something. Harry called out specifically Nicklin having represented NGN and MGN. That was what he
he
said.
did. I mean, the response to that is good. You want a judge to have acted for both sides, have experience of both sides. That's that's what you want. But I mean, lawyers act for both sides to get experience of both. They're kind of hired guns to make good arguments. I mean, that's not. I
Yeah,
mean, again, it's like that's someone who doesn't really understand the system. It doesn't. It's not a perfect system,
yeah,
but
and
it's
yeah, on
um
that, actually, I think one of the things that got brought out of this entire process was that when Harry was sort of on the stand, whether that was in this case or previously, he seemed very, like I think a lot of litigants, quite keen to get the emotional side across. And I actually think that, that's what a lot of young lawyers think about when they're thinking about how cases look like, the impassioned speech, the sort of a few good men kind of emotional outrage of the people who have been wronged. Whereas it doesn't really matter if you can't prove, um, you know, without any sort of doubt that something happened or something was the case. I think, especially in this case, Justice Nicklin was like, stop trying to remove the burden of proof. Like, stop trying to do that. That you can't just, emotion and suspicion cannot trump that. Um, And yeah, so I think that's definitely a case where you sort of go into a process thinking it's going to be one way, when in fact it's a lot drier, a lot more stressful, and a lot less personal and, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
than you think.
And I guess in reality, I mean, some judges may be more receptive to some of those more emotional arguments, and some might not. And it and that's again, it's a limitation of the process. It depends who you get. And I mean, having said that, I mean, most high court judges are really impressive individuals, and you're getting a really kind of good quality of person, but they're human, right? They are human, and they're gonna um it's but yeah, and I suppose that's the other aspect of these. It's yeah, this stuff, it's very complicated. So there's an emotional element, but there's so much strategy in litigation. And there's especially something as complicated with this, with all the sort of different claimants, and there's so much strategy. So again, it's something that we talk about, this opportunity cost, just going around in your head. There's elements to that that kind of go into costs, like I don't know what Harry's insurance situation is, because obviously, you're dealing with massive amounts of money. You have like after the event insurance as well, which you can take mid litigation, which allows you to kind of keep going if necessary. These very difficult calculations that both claimants and defendants have to make in these cases, and they tend not to go all the way. This case is rare in that sense. Most of them settle at an earlier stage, partly because just the horrendous costs involved. And then I suppose the other aspect of it is there's a lot in a case like this. There's a lot beyond the actual law in the case that you can't really control. And in this instance, I suppose we see it with the media, because the media, okay, the old media newspapers are a declining power, but they're obviously, once they're kind of sued, there is a bit of a kind of media club there, and they kind of support each other. And you know, Harry's not going to get favorable coverage from the media when he's doing this kind of thing, and that's something you can't really control in a case. I'm not saying that influenced Nicklin, but in terms of just Harry's general life, like for example, like the Invictus Games, and that's a good thing that he's built. It's like but if getting, I mean, the media can be kind of professional too, but I mean, it's going to affect the way you're painted, and certainly the PR aspect of Harry and his family in the UK, certainly among the UK media, is pretty negative. And again, it's something to consider before you launch into like a massive case like this. It's like there's going to be not only opportunity cost, but also cost in other aspects of your life and business, and all the kind of different complicated aspects of the world that something like this is gonna affect. And that's, yeah. So I mean, it's kind of, you get to a point, I suppose. um suppose just because we're going to talk a second about kind of what should Harry have done. But actually, maybe let's talk about that now, and then we can kind of talk a bit about the kind of media. Actually, sorry, going back and forth. I suppose we have touched on that. And Julia, so you were the editor in chief at the Tab when you were at Cambridge University, and so you know a lot of people in your position, and you're becoming a lawyer, but you're becoming a corporate lawyer, and I suppose a lot of people with such a kind of like prestigious type student job would have gone in to be a journalist themselves, or maybe media law. And I spoke a little bit about the kind of declining power of old media, and perhaps that not make it such an attractive area. And it's just interesting that this isn't an area that you've chose to go into, either as a journalist or a lawyer.
Yeah, I suppose I really did pursue it quite seriously in my in my second year. I, spoke to journalists and went to lots of different events and tried really to understand what the role was like. But I think because it is such a declining power, the media landscape and the sort of titans of media have switched gears when it comes to how they approach, telling the news. It's a lot less about writing, information gathering, etc. At a lower level, and it was more about just like knowing the right people and jumping on certain stories that are going to get lots of clicks, because print media is obviously in such a level of decline that just like all you can rely on is people clicking on your links and making sure that you get as much traffic as possible to your website. So that didn't
Both
particularly.
in fairness to like a lot of quality titles like the Times, the
Oh
FT,
yeah,
etc.
yeah.
Their subscription, they've got a subscription model, so it's
But you've got
not.
to get to that level. Like when you're starting out as like a 20 something, there's only so much you can do in terms of getting your bylines that are sort of like lots of the people I knew at the Tab went on to work at the Tab National, which is like the central. And all my love to the Tab National, but their focus is very tabloid-esque, and that was not what I was interested in. And so I did vaguely consider media law at a time, but as you said, it's such a closed off and small section of the legal landscape that everyone seems to know everyone, and the few sort of law firms that focus on it, you know, they have like one or two media lawyers, and it's barely a trading contract seat. So it very much seemed like an if you know, you know. And
I
I do,
think that's
yeah,
probably maybe that's I suppose I would say that's a shame you've got that perception, and I can
yeah,
totally see why you've got that perception. But it shouldn't. I don't think it. I, sh- I
it
don't
is a
think it's
shame. I
necessarily
agree.
it. But it would speak to it not being a. I don't think it's necessarily a closed off area. It's probably.
It is smaller. It just by
It's
virtue of
certainly
the fact that it's
smaller,
a
and
smaller
in
area.
fairness, I know that the law firms involved in that, yeah, they will. Well, it's changing now with the SQE, but often they won't offer funded training contracts.
Yeah.
They you have to work as a paralegal and you have to self-fund the well, it was the LPC, now the SQE. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is a bit closed off, and at the bar, it's we talked about the lack of publicity that the Inns of Court scholarships, which sponsor students to qualify as barristers, get. So then it's at the bar, it's kind of a niche within a niche, I
Yeah.
suppose. But it shouldn't. But yeah, perhaps you're right.
Yeah, well,
Perhaps.
shout out to Bates Wells for rejecting my application. And they were the one firm that I really wanted to gun for media law at, because they've got a pretty cool
Ah,
media law practice, but it is what it is.
never take these things personally. I'd say it is certainly on a training contract application. The numbers are very, very high, and it
Exactly.
can be bit random. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because I think if you were coming into this, it's 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago. Um, and then if you go even further back, sort of 20 years ago, I suppose, um, it was like the newspapers were, we're talking pre-social media, sort of early-ish internet. The newspapers had a lot of power in this country. And it's funny now to think the power that the Sun newspaper used to have, because it was all powerful. And they were the really gatekeepers of information. And the broadsheets were much more powerful too. And as a result, I suppose careers as journalists for the newspapers was higher status. I mean, tabloids, yes, sure, it was always seen as a bit seedy, but it was still kind of high status. It was, and broadsheet journalist was probably one of the highest status jobs as a graduate 20 years ago. But that's certainly shifted, and I think, yeah, the perception of the media is kind of clickbait, or just, I suppose, if you're in a subscription newspaper, even just, they've got good subscription levels, but just not being that influential, not being read. I suppose it's almost the new thing of that is kind of being an influencer, and
Yeah.
you're your own social media influencer, but that's a slightly different kind of personality.
And I could not do that. I don't think I have. I don't want to.
So, so yeah, so it's quite telling that you've not gone into media law, and I suppose like that media law community, because it is them making these kind of arguing these cases, making decisions. I suppose they have to be a little bit careful about the perception that they've got of being closed. They do have to be a little bit careful about that, and they perhaps they do need to work harder um, to make them known that it's a doable career path, and perhaps they need to look at their funding sponsorship models for students, because then otherwise when people are Harry's throwing on terms like whitewash, which I do think is a ridiculous thing to say, but perhaps the risk is that sort of thing sticks if there is that broad perception. So perhaps they need to be lawyers in that area do need to listen a little bit. um what should Harry have done then? What should Harry have done? So before I give my view on that, Julia, what's your sense?
I mean, I had to think about this, and he's obviously pursued it from like a righteous justice lens because I don't think maybe he was naive enough to think that he'd get money out of it, but I really don't think that's the case. I think it was a sort of bring down the press approach. Um, it's easy to say that he probably shouldn't have bothered, and that he maybe should have not done quite as many. Um, but I'm on the fence about this because I understand the sort of emotional aspect of it. But if you wanted to be completely pragmatic about it, I would have just moved on. I wouldn't have like wasted all that time and energy on top of, having the sort of highly publicized, controversial relationship with his family. Um, I would have just left it. I would have just gone to America and started my life there and kept my life there rather than, having to come back all the time. And the king didn't let him stay in Buckingham Palace, apparently, for some reason. So, like, it's really quite tense. Like, just move on. But it's easy for me to say that. What about you? What do you think you
Yeah,
could have done?
yeah. I think what you make is so, I mean, some of the stuff with the phone hacking was horrendous, right? And ultimately, in this instance, this case, it's decided that, the Mail didn't get these stories through phone hacking. There's a lot of other ways that journalists get stories. But some of the phone hacking stuff was horrible, right? And like you can imagine, you know, you, it, people thought these sort of celebrities and other people in the public eye, they thought that their own friends were like kind of dishing dirt on them behind their backs, and they got really paranoid and stuff. And no, their voicemails were just being hacked, right? And so it damaged friendships. It was nasty stuff. And I think from that perspective, this I can see why there's so much anger, and and obviously that's happened to Harry and you know and other people in the public eye with other newspapers, and I can see how horrible and toxic that was. And I suppose there's a Leveson inquiry there, and it's become I guess whoever's case, whether you fight a case on that or not, it's become a kind of standard thing in like society and popular perception that phone hacking happened. It was really horrible. It won't happen again. We feel sorry for the victims of phone hacking. And so I suppose I've kind of set that aside. So I do understand that the feeling to need to kind of right some of these wrongs, especially, I mean, I can't imagine sort of in Harry's case, where, with his mother involved and things. I mean, I can't imagine that. So it's pretty. I feel it's like it's unfair to pass judgment on that. But as just taking a step back as an impartial observer, doesn't know it. Doesn't know. Well, knows that some of the lawyers, but doesn't know Prince Harry. Um, I said what he should have done for me is don't look back, look forward. Say, okay, the old media is a declining power. Old newspapers, whatever, they're still there, but I mean, they're not going to die, but they're not the powerful gatekeepers that they once were. And I'd probably take just some pleasure in that fact. Like technology's changed things, and they're not what they were. The editor of the Sun, the editor of the Mail, whatever. They're not these like public, all scary figures now. And no, it's like, so I would probably take some satisfaction in that. Then I'd probably say, okay, well, I'm perfectly positioned in new media to do some really interesting stuff. I can build up myself as some kind of like Royal California influencer. I mean, it's not the sort of stuff that I'd be watching, but I mean, I suppose, there's a lot of interest in Harry and Meghan, and you could have, I suppose they've done it to a certain extent, but you could have really kind of pushed on with that. Yeah, and from your massive new media platform with all your Instagram and TikTok followers and stuff, you could just like mock the old media that have kind of wronged you in the past and kind of take the piss out of them a bit and just that would probably be fun. You could have done that. I mean, there's nothing legal about that. You could be him and Megan could be doing podcasts like kind of having a laugh at the decline of the Daily Mail and the Sun as a force in British public life. That they could do something on that. They could do an episode on journalists that they think had wronged them. They could have had a bit of fun on that. Um, it wouldn't have had to involved paying 50 million to lawyers. It would have been a lot cheaper. People might have been impressed. I mean, it could still, people might have been impressed by their kind of humor and wit about it, and it would have been certainly kind of unusual. And then they could have had lots of stuff of them. What was it? The best revenge is to live well, And so, but yeah. So I think to conclude, um, that it looks a lot like me. Like a lot of people go into litigation thinking it is a more straightforward, kind of purer, black and white thing than it actually is.
Mm. Yeah.
And they come out, you speak to anyone who's been through litigation, come out the other side of it, and you're just like, yeah, that's quite an ordeal.
Yeah.
I don't really feel very better either way, and it cost me a lot of money. And yeah. So thank you for listening to today's podcast. The Legal Cheek podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity training contract. Do check out the Legal Cheek website and Firms Most list, where you'll see details of Simpson Thatcher's new training contract in London, hiring lots of students in this new recruitment round. And we will be back very soon.
Bye.
Bye.